My name is Holice Turnbow, and I live in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. And I've been quilting for a number of years, although I've been around quilting for even more years than that. Because as I grew up, I had aunts who lived out on the farm, grandmother, who were all very prolific quilters. And as they did in the old days, quilts were used to keep warm because there was no central heat in the farmhouse or in most houses in town either at that time. So I lived around quilting. I played under the quilt when it was hanging under from the ceiling. So it's one of those things that you learn things that you really didn't know that you knew. But then in late 1969, early 1970s, when quilting became popular again just before the bicentennial, I had an opportunity to actually start teaching, because I was teaching for a local rec department, teaching needlework as art rather than embroidered cup towels and decorative items. So I was teaching it as art, and one day I got a call from the director who asked me if I knew anything about quilting, and I said, sure. And I'm sure without realizing it, I did this. Remember I said I played under the quilt when I was a child, watching what was happening in the needle coming through. So it was something that I just knew how to do, but I actually had never even made one at that point or taught it or needed to do it. I was very fortunate at the time in that an exhibit was traveling the country as Quilts as Folk Art. And it had opened in New York City in about 1971, 72. In 1973, it was at one of the galleries in Washington, D.C. And I went to see it because I worked very close. And sitting out in the foyer of the rotunda of the museum were these women around a quilting frame. So I went up to them and said, I have a problem. Well, what is it? I need to start quilting, start teaching quilting. And while I know how to do it, I've never taught it. They were very helpful in helping me to develop a course outline for quilting, and I started. I was fortunate at the time because it was really a time in history before it became cool for a man to quilt. So I started teaching, and it just blossomed from there. I taught one class, eventually moved to West Virginia shortly after that, and folk art and needlework was a big deal out in West Virginia, so I just became part of it. And I think because I was a man, there was a lot of attraction and notoriety, and I began teaching and attending quilt shows, and it just went from that. And during those early days of 1972, mid-72, there were not many men doing it. We read about husbands who would agree to thread the wives' needles, but they would never admit to putting a needle in their fingers and start doing quilting. So it was a time that it was very appropriate to start doing it. And over the years, I've had a lot of very special opportunity to be recognized and advance in the work. In 1978, I was part of an event to introduce a postage stamp that had been issued about quilt making. Then I became interested in quilting stencils, and my daughter had a chance to establish a company. So it's just grown with that, knowing companies that dealt with quilting, being recognized, became a teacher certified by the National Quilting Association and a judge also certified by the National Quilting Association. And here I am now, having been part of a major industry change. And I'm sure that my aunts who quilted around the quilting frame in farmhouse in the panhandle of Texas would never have believed that a common household activity would become the billion-dollar industry that it has today. I like coming to these events that you're seeing this tape of because it allows a group to get together and just relax in quilting. The fact that it's only men is of not any major significance, but it does give us a chance to come out and be part of a very companionable weekend to quilt together, share information, see what other people are doing. There are a lot of men out there doing it now, and I'm certainly glad to be part of that and have been part of this whole movement called quilt making. I'm often asked what kind of quilting that I do. I teach a lot of techniques, and I like to concentrate on the very basic techniques that are required for good quilt making. I've come to the conclusion over the years that there's really only two major requirements or rules in quilt making, and that's accurate cutting and accurate piecing. Because quilts very often are pieces put together just like a jigsaw puzzle. And if the pieces don't fit, the puzzle doesn't fit. So I tend to gravitate back to those things that make it easy, because when you do the right kind of technique, then it certainly saves on my frustration. I've never made a prize-winning quilt like many of my friends do. I really have no interest in that, but I do get a great deal of pleasure out of the very simple things. I do a lot of quilts for charity, make quilts for hospital and other charitable organizations, but I always gravitate back to that simple things because that's what gives me the greatest amount of pleasure. The other thing that I have done a lot of work with is concentration on the quilting design itself. That design that you stitch into the quilt that makes the decorative motif and holds the three layers together. Had a chance several years ago to work with a company to develop designs called whole cloth quilt. And whole cloth is a very special quilt design that's one piece of fabric, but just the quilting stitch is what makes the design on it. So I've tended to stay with that, you know, the design that you stitch onto it. But then I'll always go back to the simple things, those things that are easy. The excitement about it is not necessarily the pattern, but the color of the fabric that you use. So I like the simple things because quilting absolutely is therapeutic. When I'm stressed out, I go to the sewing machine, go to the basement and start making little quilts. So that's the kind of work that I do, but I do enjoy teaching. But when I teach, I go back to the simple things, concentrating on those one or two things, the accuracy of your piece cutting and the accuracy of sewing it together, because that's what makes a good jigsaw puzzle called quilting. I enjoy coming to weekends like this, can get away from home without the pressure of whatever's going on in one's life. And what I tend to bring with me are, I almost hate to use the word mindless projects, but those very simple things that within a weekend I can accomplish a lot of production on it. This particular one, I brought about three simple projects that will make a quilted piece about 45 by 60, which is a good left size. The kind of thing that I will give to a charitable organization, or the Quilts of Valor project, or maybe a technique that I've been interested in but just simply haven't sat down to do it. So it's those kind of things that you can sit down and accomplish a lot of production in a short period of time. Have something to take home and be proud of, and then perhaps finish up. Just the tops would be finished, and then when I get home, it would be sandwiched together in quilting. So it's the easy time, that which you really don't take time to do at home because you have deadlines and things, easy things, but want a pile of finished products in a bag when you go home. So that's what these weekends are all about. It indeed is a retreat to take you away from the other pressures. And I do enjoy them and come whenever I can. We're fortunate that we have this twice a year now in order to do that. And back on my work table at home, I'll stack up these projects just waiting to be off and start meeting with another group of like-minded quilters here in a relaxed atmosphere.